A man moved swiftly through a narrow Berlin alley in the summer of 1939, his footsteps echoing softly on the cobblestones. In his coat pocket lay a stolen document, blueprints of German fortifications and troop movements. A cigarette burned low between his fingers, its smoke curling into the night air. To the casual observer, he was just another passerby. In reality, he was a spy, risking everything in a shadow war that had already begun long before the first shot of World War II. Espionage, the world of secrets and deception, had become a battlefield of its own. Even before Hitler's invasion of Poland in September 1939, rival intelligence services were laying the groundwork for a global conflict. Armies had not yet clashed, but spies, codebreakers, and double agents were already hard at work. Germany relied on the Abwehr, its military intelligence organization, led by Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, a man outwardly loyal to Hitler but privately skeptical of Nazi fanaticism. Across the Channel, Britain's MI6 watched war clouds gather and quietly expanded its networks in Europe. In Moscow, the NKVD, Stalin's feared secret police, infiltrated governments and military staffs abroad. Meanwhile, in the United States, still officially neutral, plans were drawn to create the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the forerunner of the CIA. This was not a war of tanks and artillery, but of dead drops, invisible ink, and whispered conversations in smoke-filled cafes. Messages were smuggled in hollow coins, microfilm concealed in shoelaces, and intelligence relayed over coded radio bursts that could be intercepted in seconds. For every victory that unfolded later on the battlefield, there had already been a battle of wits fought in the shadows. The scale of this hidden war was underestimated by many political leaders. Chamberlain's Britain, focused on appeasement, was slow to realize how critical intelligence would become. Stalin's paranoia led him to dismiss crucial warnings, even rejecting Soviet agents who accurately predicted Hitler's coming invasion in 1941. Hitler himself placed only partial faith in his own intelligence officers, preferring ideological conviction over analysis. Yet the fate of nations would soon depend on these overlooked networks. In occupied Europe, espionage began almost as soon as German troops marched in. In Poland, the resistance smuggled photographs of German troop movements to Britain, helping Allied planners piece together Hitler's strategy. In Czechoslovakia, underground agents risked arrest to deliver intelligence on German aircraft production. French and Belgian railway workers passed on train schedules, seemingly ordinary information that became invaluable to Allied strategists. Each scrap of paper, each overheard conversation, could shift the balance of war. The methods of espionage reflected both ingenuity and desperation. Radios built from scavenged parts crackled faintly in the night, their operators changing frequencies constantly to avoid detection vans prowling the streets. Agents memorized codes, knowing a single written cipher could doom them if discovered. Some operated under false identities for years, raising families while secretly sending intelligence across borders. Others were betrayed by neighbors or colleagues and vanished into Gestapo prisons, their names remembered only in fragments of post-war reports. Espionage was not glamorous. It was a world of constant tension. A British agent once wrote in his diary, paraphrased after the war, "Every day you woke wondering if you would see nightfall. But to know that your message might save lives kept you going." This was the reality of the men and women who waged war without uniforms, often with little recognition. By 1939, the shadow war had grown too large to ignore. Intelligence was already altering decisions at the highest levels. Stalin had access to reports from his agents in Tokyo and Berlin. Churchill quietly valued MI6 summaries long before he became prime minister. And in Washington, Roosevelt was briefed by contacts gathering intelligence from Europe. Yet all of them faced the same question: how much trust could be placed in information that came from the shadows? The storm of global war was about to break, and when it did, espionage would move from preparation to survival. Codebreakers, spies, and secret agents would no longer simply gather information. They would become decisive weapons in the struggle to defeat Nazi Germany and its allies. The man in the Berlin alley disappeared into the night, the stolen blueprints safe in his hand. It was a small act, a single thread in a vast web of espionage. Yet such moments, hidden, dangerous, unseen, would shape the destiny of nations. The thunder of guns and the clash of armies were only one face of the Second World War. Behind the front lines, another battle raged, a battle of intellect, patience, and secrecy. At its center was a small, unassuming device of rotors and wires, the German Enigma machine. To the Wehrmacht, the Kriegsmarine, and the Luftwaffe, Enigma was a shield of iron logic, encrypting their communications into indecipherable streams of letters. To the Allies, it was a wall that had to be broken, or the war might be lost. The struggle began before the war itself. In the early 1930s, Polish cryptanalysts at the Cipher Bureau quietly studied Enigma. Mathematicians Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Rositzky, and Henryk Zygalski applied advanced algebra to replicate the machine's workings. They even designed perforated sheets, Zygalski sheets, to help unravel the daily settings. By 1939, as German rearmament accelerated, the Poles shared their findings with Britain and France. It was an extraordinary act of cooperation, laying the first stones of a path that would later lead to Bletchley Park. At Bletchley, a country estate turned into a fortress of intellect. The challenge passed into British hands. Inside dimly lit huts, mathematicians, linguists, and chess champions worked relentlessly. Among them was Alan Turing, a quiet Cambridge genius whose breakthroughs in logic would reshape both the war and the world of computing. Turing designed the bomb, an electromechanical machine capable of testing thousands of Enigma settings in minutes. Each bomb was a towering mass of rotating drums and wires, its steady hum the heartbeat of Allied code breaking. The task, however, was colossal. The Germans improved Enigma, adding extra rotors and daily changing settings, creating billions of possible combinations. The Kriegsmarine proved the most formidable foe. Their U-boats, prowling the Atlantic in wolf packs, threatened Britain's survival by targeting food and supply convoys. Every time the Germans altered their procedures, Bletchley's work had to begin anew. It felt like chasing a shadow that changed shape every morning, one analyst later recalled. Yet progress came. By 1941, the efforts of Bletchley Park's teams, combined with intelligence from captured codebooks seized during daring naval raids, began yielding results. Messages once thought impossible to read suddenly opened up. The decrypted intelligence was given the codename Ultra. Winston Churchill, briefed daily, called it his golden goose, a stream of secrets that fed Allied strategy. Ultra changed the course of the war quietly but decisively. Convoys could be rerouted to avoid U-boats. Air raids were planned with knowledge of enemy defenses. Even the timing of Rommel's North African offensives was revealed in advance. The Allies began to see the battlefield through their enemies' eyes. But secrecy was absolute. To act on ultra-intelligence too directly risked exposing the source. Often, commanders had to devise elaborate cover stories, sending reconnaissance flights to discover what codebreakers had already revealed. The people behind these victories were not soldiers with rifles, but ordinary men and women waging war with pencils, typewriters, and machines. The Women's Royal Naval Service, WRENS, operated the bombs tirelessly, feeding in endless streams of intercepted text. Translators pieced together fragments of meaning. Mathematicians wrestled with the puzzles of logic. They worked in silence, rarely knowing the impact of their efforts, yet carrying the weight of entire campaigns on their shoulders. Daily life at Bletchley Park was cloaked in secrecy. Corridors buzzed with whispers, rooms smelled of ink and oil from the bombs, and blackout curtains hid the glow of midnight work. Exhaustion was constant. As one operator later paraphrased, "We lived on tea, adrenaline, and the fear that if we failed, men would die at sea." By 1942, ultra-intelligence was flowing steadily. Its influence stretched from the Battle of the Atlantic to the deserts of North Africa. It was a hidden lifeline, unseen by the public, unknown to most soldiers, but indispensable to victory. Churchill would later remark that the work of Bletchley shortened the war by at least 2 years. The battle to break Enigma was never truly over. Each new German innovation forced Bletchley's staff to adapt, to innovate, to fight a war of logic in parallel with the war of guns. But the victory of codebreakers proved that intelligence, gathered in silence, interpreted in secrecy, could be as powerful as any weapon. The hidden war of mathematics and machines had begun to turn the tide, quietly reshaping history from the shadows. While codebreakers at Bletchley Park fought the war with machines and mathematics, another army waged it in the shadows. Men and women who carried false papers, whispered in safe houses, and lived under the constant gaze of enemy suspicion. They were the spies and operatives who risked everything to steal secrets, sabotage supply lines, and inspire resistance. For them, every day was a coin toss between survival and betrayal. One of the most remarkable figures was Richard Sorg, a German-born journalist working in Tokyo. Outwardly a loyal correspondent, in reality, he was a Soviet agent embedded deep within the Japanese capital. Sorg built networks inside the German embassy and the Japanese government itself, passing crucial intelligence back to Moscow. In 1941, he warned Stalin of Hitler's coming invasion, Operation Barbarossa, and later assured him that Japan would not attack the Soviet Union that year. It was a message of incalculable importance. It allowed Stalin to redeploy divisions from Siberia to defend Moscow. Though Sorg's warnings were not always heeded, his courage in operating within the heart of enemy alliances remains legendary. Arrested later in 1941, he was executed in Tokyo, his contributions unacknowledged until after the war. On the other side of the world, an unlikely figure rose to prominence in the French countryside. Virginia Hall, an American working with Britain's Special Operations Executive, SOE, became one of the most effective Allied operatives in occupied France. Known to the Gestapo as the most dangerous Allied spy, Hall worked with a wooden prosthetic leg she nicknamed Cuthbert. She organized resistance cells, coordinated parachute drops of weapons, and set up escape routes for downed Allied pilots. Disguised as a milkmaid or an old woman, she moved through villages under the noses of German patrols. French partisans later recalled her iron resolve, noting that she inspired courage simply by her presence. Though constantly hunted, Hall evaded capture and continued her work until liberation. Inside Germany itself, resistance also stirred, though at unimaginable risk. Hans Oster, a general in the Abwehr intelligence service, secretly opposed Hitler's regime. From his position within German military intelligence, Oster leaked plans and offered quiet support to anti-Nazi conspirators. He was part of the clandestine circles that later attempted to assassinate Hitler in 1944. For years, he walked a tightrope, pretending loyalty while quietly undermining the very war machine he served. Eventually betrayed, Oster was arrested and executed in April 1945, just weeks before Germany's surrender. His story exemplifies the inner conflict of German officers who could not openly resist yet refused to remain complicit. Daily life for these agents was a world of nerves and improvisation. Parachute drops into occupied territory often ended in disaster, with operatives landing in the wrong fields or directly into enemy patrols. Coded radio transmissions, tapped out in hidden attics or barns, carried constant danger. Gestapo detection vans triangulated signals, closing in within minutes. Photographs of bridges, airfields, and bunkers were smuggled in hollowed-out shoes or toothpaste tubes. Every handshake could be a test. Every glance from a stranger might mean exposure. Captured agents faced brutal interrogations. Many did not survive. One SOE operative later wrote that, "You never trusted even the mirror. It might betray you." And yet, despite the risks, their work shaped the tide of war. French resistance fighters, guided by Allied spies, disrupted rail networks before D-Day, delaying German reinforcements to Normandy. Soviet operatives behind enemy lines sabotaged supply depots, cutting lifelines to the Eastern Front. From Tokyo to Paris, whispers in the dark were altering the course of history. The sacrifices of these men and women often went unrecognized during their lifetimes. Many were executed quietly, their names erased from records. Yet their actions provided the Allies with intelligence that armies alone could never have gathered. The War of Shadows was ruthless, but it was also decisive. Each agent carried within them not only their own fate, but the possibility of shaping nations. Their courage, lived in silence and often ended in obscurity, was the lifeblood of the Secret War. As the war deepened, the Allies realized that raw intelligence alone was not enough. To win, they had to mislead, to manipulate, and to turn the enemy's trust against itself. Out of this need was born one of the most audacious operations of the Second World War, Britain's double-cross system. The principle was simple but dangerous. Capture German spies sent into Britain, then convince them to work for the Allies. Under constant surveillance, these agents were given carefully crafted information to transmit back to the WWII, Germany's military intelligence service. What began as a trickle of captured operatives evolved into a network of double agents feeding Berlin a steady diet of lies, half-truths, and carefully staged details. Among them was Juan Pujol Garcia, a Spaniard who came to be known by his codename, Garbo. A master of deception, Garcia created an entire fictional spy ring, inventing more than 20 sub-agents across Britain. From these phantom operatives, he delivered reports so detailed and believable that the Germans rewarded him with medals, never realizing they were being manipulated by one man working for MI5. The brilliance of the system lay in balance. A double agent who only sent falsehoods would be exposed quickly. Instead, they had to deliver just enough real intelligence, small details about convoy departures or troop conditions, while hiding the larger truths. This required intricate planning. Each falsehood had to be plausible, each fact carefully chosen to maintain credibility. The stakes could not have been higher. Discovery meant execution. By 1944, the double-cross system reached its greatest triumph. As the Allies prepared for the largest amphibious assault in history, Operation Overlord, the D-Day landings in Normandy, misdirection was essential. The Germans had fortified the coast of France with the Atlantic Wall, but where would the blow fall? To protect the invasion, Allied planners launched Operation Fortitude, a deception campaign built on double agents, fake armies, and illusions of strength. Through Garbo and others, the WWII was convinced that the true invasion would strike at Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point across the Channel. To reinforce the lie, the Allies constructed dummy camps in southeast England, filled with inflatable tanks, wooden aircraft, and even fake radio traffic simulating the presence of the 1st U.S. Army Group, supposedly commanded by General George S. Patton. From the air, reconnaissance photographs showed what appeared to be an army poised for battle. In reality, it was an elaborate stage set. On June 6, 1944, when Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy, German high command hesitated. Believing the Normandy landings were a diversion, they kept powerful armored divisions stationed near Calais for weeks. By the time the truth became undeniable, the Allies had established a foothold in France. The deception had saved countless lives and accelerated the liberation of Western Europe. The double-cross system was not without constant risk. Each transmission had to be vetted, each fabricated detail measured against German expectations. German intelligence officers cross-examined their agents, tested their loyalty, and demanded results. Yet the web of deception held. At war's end, it was revealed that nearly every German spy sent to Britain had been captured and turned, making the WWII unknowingly reliant on a network entirely controlled by its enemy. One MI5 officer later paraphrased the achievement. "We did not just trick the Germans. We rewrote the story they believed they were living." The success of the double-cross system demonstrated the true power of psychological warfare. Deception, when executed with precision, could reshape entire campaigns. It was proof that in modern war, perception was as lethal a weapon as artillery or aircraft. From whispered lies and phantom armies, the Allies had built a weapon that turned the tide. The battlefield was not only fought in mud and blood, but in the minds of commanders making decisions from maps clouded with illusions. Espionage was a shadow war waged not with rifles or tanks, but with whispers, forged documents, and secret signals scratched in chalk on lampposts. Yet behind the veil of intrigue lay a brutal truth. Thousands of agents who entered this clandestine battlefield never returned. Their lives ended not in glory, but in prison cells, interrogation chambers, and execution yards across occupied Europe. The Special Operations Executive (SOE), created by Winston Churchill in 1940, carried the task of setting Europe ablaze. Its agents parachuted into France, the Low Countries, and the Balkans to train resistance groups, sabotage rail lines, and spread disinformation. Many were young, scarcely in their 20s, armed with only a pistol, a wireless set, and the hope that their false identities would hold under scrutiny. Once captured, their fate was often sealed. The Gestapo, masters of counterintelligence, ruthlessly tracked radio transmissions, triangulating signals until they cornered an operator. One miskeyed message could mean the end, a surviving agent later recalled. In France, betrayal was as deadly as bullets. Resistance networks, carefully built over months, could collapse overnight when a single collaborator revealed names under pressure or for reward. In 1943, the Prosper Network, one of the largest SOE circuits in Paris, was compromised. Dozens of agents were arrested, tortured, and deported to concentration camps such as Buchenwald and Ravensbrück. Few survived. The Soviet Union faced equal tragedy. The NKVD sent countless partisans and informants behind German lines to sabotage supply depots and assassinate officers. Many disappeared without trace. In the forests of Belarus and Ukraine, captured partisans were executed en masse, their bodies left as warnings to others. For Stalin's operatives, survival was doubly perilous. Even those who returned sometimes faced suspicion and punishment at home, accused of treachery simply for having been captured. Not all who died did so for noble reasons. Espionage was a world where trust could shatter in an instant. Double agents, whether out of fear, money, or ideology, betrayed their comrades. In the Netherlands, a Gestapo-run operation known as the Englandspiel deceived the SOE into parachuting in wave after wave of agents, all of whom were immediately captured. Over 50 men and women were sent directly into German hands, their missions doomed before they even touched the ground. Testimonies from survivors who endured capture reveal the cold machinery of Nazi counterintelligence. Interrogations stretched for hours under blinding lights. Prisoners were beaten, starved, and forced to listen to the screams of others. Some broke, some resisted until death, and others clung to silence until the end. The Gestapo's methods left scars that lingered long after liberation. Among those who paid with their lives were Noor Inayat Khan, a wireless operator of Indian heritage who refused to abandon her post in Paris despite the dangers. Arrested in 1943, she endured months of torture but revealed nothing of her network. In 1944, she was executed at Dachau, her last word reported as Liberté. Stories like hers stand as stark reminders of the cost of defiance. By war's end, thousands of operatives had perished, some executed in secret, others vanishing in the smoke of camps whose ashes left no trace. Their sacrifices rarely appeared in headlines, overshadowed by generals and battles. Yet their silent struggle shaped the very fabric of the war. Espionage was a realm of paradox, courage and treachery, survival and sacrifice. The spies who never came home remind us that the secret war was not glamorous but merciless, demanding everything and often giving nothing in return. As the global conflict entered its decisive years, espionage shifted from the margins of warfare to its very heart. By 1942, intelligence had become a weapon as vital as tanks or aircraft, shaping battles across land, sea, and air. The Battle of the Atlantic revealed the power of secret knowledge. German U-boats, organized into deadly wolf packs, threatened to starve Britain by sinking merchant convoys crossing from North America. Early in the war, losses were catastrophic. Thousands of tons of food, oil, and equipment sent to the bottom each month. Yet in the quiet rooms of Bletchley Park, codebreakers deciphered Enigma messages detailing U-boat patrol zones. Armed with this intelligence, Allied convoys altered routes, evading ambushes and directing escort ships and aircraft to hunt submarines. A Royal Navy officer later paraphrased the effect. "We were no longer blind at sea. The enemy was exposed before he struck." The tide turned, not only through sonar and depth charges, but through the silent war of ciphers and signals. Far away in the deserts of North Africa, intelligence again proved decisive. At El Alamein in October 1942, British commanders under General Bernard Montgomery faced Erwin Rommel, the famed Desert Fox. Through decrypted communications, The British knew the Axis supply situation was critical and could predict troop movements with uncanny accuracy. Coupled with deception operations, such as false minefields and staged radio chatter, the intelligence allowed Montgomery to strike at Rommel's weakest points. When the battle ended, the Axis forces began a retreat across North Africa, a turning point Churchill hailed as the end of the beginning. But the most famous triumph of wartime deception came with the preparations for Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion of June 1944. Here, espionage and subterfuge reached their zenith. The Allies launched Operation Fortitude, convincing Hitler that the invasion would fall not on Normandy, but at Pas-de-Calais. Double agents like Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo, fed Berlin a stream of carefully curated lies. Inflatable tanks, wooden aircraft, and entire phantom armies appeared along the English coast, supported by fake radio transmissions. Even after Allied troops stormed Normandy's beaches, German commanders hesitated, believing the main attack was yet to come. Divisions that could have repelled the landings remained tied down at Calais. Espionage, more than any weapon, secured the fragile Allied beachhead. On the Eastern Front, intelligence played a different but equally critical role. Soviet partisans, operating deep behind German lines, sabotaged railways, cut communication cables, and assassinated officers. Informants passed details of German supply movements to the Red Army. At Stalingrad, such reports allowed Soviet forces to anticipate Axis offensives and prepare ambushes in the ruins of the city. At Kursk in 1943, one of history's largest tank battles, Soviet intelligence uncovered German plans for Operation Citadel weeks in advance. When the Wehrmacht struck, they collided with defenses already primed to absorb and destroy them. Soviet spies and guerrillas, often anonymous and forgotten, had helped tip the balance of the Eastern Front. For the leaders of the Allied coalition, Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin, intelligence became indispensable. By 1943, Churchill was receiving ultra-decrypts daily, often before field commanders in the line of battle. Roosevelt relied on OSS reports to track Japanese movements in the Pacific. Stalin, despite his paranoia, eventually came to trust Soviet informants whose warnings shaped his deployments. War councils were no longer guided solely by maps and instinct, but by the invisible hand of espionage. The turning tide of World War II was not achieved by brute strength alone. It was won in the hidden realm of deception, in the patient work of codebreakers, in the daring acts of partisans, and in the lies that reshaped enemy expectations. Victory in 1945 would be written by armies, but its foundation was laid in secrets. As the guns of World War II finally fell silent in 1945, a different war was already taking shape, a war of silence, shadows, and secrets. The intelligence battles of the previous 6 years had not only shaped the outcome of the conflict, but had also redefined the very meaning of modern warfare. The lessons of espionage carried directly into the Cold War. From the ashes of the OSS, America formed the Central Intelligence Agency in 1947, a permanent force dedicated to covert operations and intelligence gathering. Across the Iron Curtain, the Soviet Union expanded its NKVD, transforming it into the KGB, an organization that would wield enormous influence in the decades to come. Britain strengthened MI5 and MI6, while the United States also established the National Security Agency in 1952, tasked with signals intelligence and cryptography on an unprecedented scale. The shadow war that had begun with codebreakers and double agents would now become a permanent feature of global politics. The techniques pioneered in World War II, code-breaking, deception campaigns, dead drops, and clandestine radio transmissions, evolved into the tradecraft of the Cold War. Operation Fortitude, which had convinced Hitler to hold back forces from Normandy, became the template for deception operations used in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. The breakthroughs at Bletchley Park laid the foundations of modern computing, with Alan Turing's bomb machines serving as precursors to electronic computers. Espionage had changed the battlefield forever, proving that information could be as decisive as firepower. Yet behind these triumphs lay silence. Thousands of agents who had risked their lives and occupied Europe, in Asia, and behind enemy lines never saw recognition. Many were executed in concentration camps, their names lost in unmarked graves. Survivors often kept their experiences secret for decades, bound by official oaths or the sheer weight of memory. It was not until long after the war that their contributions were publicly acknowledged. A veteran of the Special Operations Executive once reflected, "We fought in the shadows, and in the shadows we remained." The legacy of World War II espionage was also deeply personal. Families mourned loved ones who never returned, while others carried scars of betrayal, friends or colleagues revealed as double agents. Trust and treachery had walked hand in hand through the war, blurring the boundaries of loyalty. Spies like Richard Sorg, Virginia Hall, and Juan Pugil Garcia were remembered as heroes, yet countless unnamed couriers, resistance fighters, and partisans faded into anonymity. And yet, their impact was undeniable. Leningrad's survival, the victory at El Alamein, the landings in Normandy, and the defeat of the U-boats in the Atlantic were all shaped not only by armies, but by those who gathered secrets and wove lies convincing enough to deceive entire nations. The hidden war had shifted history's course, ensuring Allied victory in a conflict where the margin between survival and defeat was razor-thin. In the decades that followed, the image of the spy became immortalized in fiction and film. Figures of mystery, courage, and duplicity. But the reality remained far grimmer. Espionage was not glamour, but hunger, fear, and constant danger. It was the quiet dread of a knock on the door, the coded message smuggled in a loaf of bread, the desperate hope that a radio transmission would not be triangulated before the escape was made. As the curtain closes on this story, we return to the opening image, a shadow moving through a Berlin alley in 1939, clutching stolen blueprints. That lone figure symbolizes the essence of the secret war, ordinary men and women shaping extraordinary outcomes in silence. They operated in alleys, in safe houses, in cipher rooms, in resistance cells. They fought with lies instead of bullets, with information instead of bombs. The 872 days of Leningrad, the Atlantic crossings, the deserts of North Africa, the beaches of Normandy, all bore the fingerprints of this unseen struggle. Espionage blurred the line between truth and deception, courage and betrayal, life and death. Its legacy endures in every intelligence agency that still operates today, in every war where information determines victory before the first shot is fired. World War II was decided not only on the battlefield, but in the shadows. And it is in those shadows that the hidden warriors of the secret war live on, silent, invisible, and eternal.